Okay friends, it's time to get started on replacing our water pump. To start, let's get under the truck and drain the coolant. Just as a quick note, anytime you're doing any service on your cooling system, it's a good idea to make sure that you flush out your existing coolant and replace it all with brand new coolant by the time you're done. Now typically underneath the front of your truck, you're going to have a couple skid shields under here. One across right there and then one across right here. Our truck doesn't particularly have one, but go ahead and remove all the mounting bolts that hold up the shields if you have them. Now underneath the driver's side of the truck, you're going to be able to find the petcock on your radiator. You're going to want to make sure that you have a bucket underneath this so you can collect all the fluid and recycle it. Let's go ahead and turn this counterclockwise and start draining the coolant. Under the hood, we're going to go ahead and open up our radiator cap. There we are. While that continues draining, let's go ahead and take off the engine cover as well and this hose. And then we're going to come over here and relieve this hose clamp as well. Set this aside. Now down along the front of the engine, the next thing that we want to do is relieve tension from the serpentine belt. You're going to be able to find the serpentine belt tensioner on the passenger side. We'll go ahead and lift up on this, and then we can remove the belt from the pulley. Once that's off, go ahead and relieve the tension here. We'll get our tool out of the way. Now that the belt has plenty of slack, we can take it off of the pulleys so we don't get any coolant on it. There we are. That's plenty out of the way now. Next thing we're going to do is continue on to removing the bolts and nuts that hold the fan to the water pump. To do this, it's going to be easiest using a wrench and of course a screwdriver or a pry bar. The reason why I want the screwdriver or pry bar is because as we try to loosen this, it's going to end up spinning the water pump. So if I just put the screwdriver or pry bar right behind here, that's going to hold this for me and I can start loosening up my mounting hardware. It's nice and loose. We'll just get this off of here and we'll finish removing all of them. Now what you're probably going to notice as you start removing the hardware is that a lot of the studs that go into the water pump come out with the nut. If that's the case, you're probably going to have a hard time getting that last one out because of course it's going to be very difficult to be able to hold on to anything to be able to get it to stop spinning. I'm just going to take one of the studs, I'll start it in there so I can still grip onto it, and then I'll remove the last nut. Okay, so now I have all the mounting hardware out of the way, except for one of them. The next thing I want to do is go ahead and break the fan free from the water pump. There we are. The next thing we're going to do is move along to removing the fan shroud from the radiator. To do that, I'm going to remove both of my mounting bolts up along the top right here. With the fan shroud loose as well, let's continue on to removing our last bolt on the fan right here, and then remove the fan with the shroud at the same time. Now with all that out of the way, we're going to continue on to removing this clamp right here, and then remove the hose. Inspect your hoses, make sure they're nice and soft. We'll set that aside. Continue on doing this one the same. Set that aside. With the hose off of there, follow the wiring along here to its mounting point. Go ahead and remove that bolt. Set that bolt aside. Now we can move this. Next, we're going to remove this mounting bolt right here, and then there will be a second one right down over here to remove as well. Now we're going to move along to removing the clamp for this inside hose. I'll just go ahead and grab onto it, squeeze it, and then slide it off this way towards the center. Now that we finished this one right here, we're going to move along to this clamp right here and do the same. Just break this free. Now let's carefully get in between here and we're going to gently pry this away. What we want to do is separate this hose right here and of course the one on the other end at the same time. Okay, so now what we need to do is go ahead and release this clamp right here, slide it out of the way, and then remove the hose completely. Typically, you can go ahead and leave the other clamp onto the line over there, just remove this one right here, and then slide the whole hose off with that tubing. Ours in particular didn't necessarily want to come off that way. Now we need to remove all 3 of these mounting bolts that I marked in yellow. Now we can wiggle this. As we wiggle it, we're going to draw it down and remove the hose from the other side. Slide that down and out of the way. Now we can wiggle this, break it free. As we do that, we're going to bring this down and relieve this hose. There we are. Set this aside. Now it's going to be time to go ahead and get the water pump pulley off of here. To do that, we're going to remove it in the same way that we removed the fan. There's one. Do the same to the other 3. Let's go ahead and get the pulley off of here. Inspect it. If it looks good, set it aside. Make sure you move your collection bucket underneath the water pump. Alright, so now as we start removing the water pump, just keep note of exactly where each bolt came from, so when we start putting in the new water pump, you can put them exactly where they came from. Let's go ahead and get that last bolt out of there fully. I'm going to hold onto the water pump. Remove that as well. Okay. There it is, friends. Now that we have the water pump out of the way, let's go ahead and remove the gasket. Typically the gasket's going to be stuck to the engine. Just go ahead and take it off of there and then make sure there's no more residue left from the gasket. Set that aside. With the gasket removed, the next thing I'm going to do is take a nice flat blade eraser like this, and I'm going to go along the engine. That's going to help remove any of the debris that might be located on there, then clean it down with a rag, and we'll get ready for our install. Once you've finished cleaning up the engine where the water pump was, we're going to continue on to cleaning this area right here that mounted to the water pump. To do that, I'm just going to carefully stuff a rag inside here. Hopefully that'll collect the majority of the debris that comes off of this. Now take your razor blade and clean down this area as well. Okay friends, now it's time to install our brand new water pump with brand new gasket. Go ahead and line it up. After you get that lined up, we're going to take 2 of our bolts. We'll just start them in there loosely, and then we'll start in all the rest of our bolts before we snug any of them up. Now that I have both of those started, let's continue on by putting in the rest. Looking at the original water pump, I just wanted to remind you that the larger bolts are going to be located up along the top area here. So we have the very long bolt. That's going to go through this hole right along this area, and then the other bolt comes through this one right here. With all the bolts started into where they belong, I'm just going to continue on by snugging them up, and then we'll torque them to manufacturer specifications. Now that we have all the bolts started, let's continue on to torquing that water pump. There's going to be 3 different torques, so make sure you pay attention. Once you have the water pump torqued down to the engine, we're going to continue on to putting on our pulley. We have our 4 bolts. Go ahead and start them in. We'll snug them up and then torque them to 15 foot-pounds. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and put our rubber O-ring on here. Go ahead and slide it right into the area that it belongs on the water pump there. After you put on the water pump pulley, we're going to grab these 3 bolts. After that, we're going to come down, grab onto the coolant inlet tube here, and we're going to get ready to slide this hose onto this tube right there. And then, of course, we're going to make sure that we have everything ready with the bolts to start those into the water pump as well. Make sure that you have that slid up as far as it can go. Let's torque these to 15 foot-pounds. Okay, so now the next thing we want to do is go ahead and make sure that these hoses right along here are remounted back to the engine. So go ahead and put the bracket around them if it came off, slide the bolt through, line it up with the hole on the engine, and then snug it up. Let's reconnect our little hose here. Put the clamp back to where you got it from. Double check to make sure it's secure. Now we're going to get ready to put our lines back on here. So I'm just going to take my clamp, I'll slide it right onto the tube, take my hose, slide it on there as well. There we are. Just turn that so I can access them. Now the next thing I want to do is start sliding this onto the tube that's above the water pump. I'm going to grab that clamp, squeeze it so we can slide it over. Okay, now that we got that one on there, let's get the other clamp on here. Now let's put on this other hose. Slide the clamp on there. Come over to the other side, do the same on this one. Now we're going to take 2 of our short bolts and get ready to mount our brackets in for these lines. All right, now that we got this one started, let's move down to this end. Do the same over there. Okay, with both of them started, let's snug them up. Now at this point, we're going to put in our fan and our shroud. Pay attention on the bottom of the fan shroud. You've got these little pitons right across here. You need to make sure that they fit in down along the radiator at the bottom. All right, we're just going to slide this down. Just be very careful not to damage the fins on your radiator. There we are. Let's get this fin onto where it belongs. All right, that's started. Now let's go ahead and install the hardware for our fan. Okay, so now we're just going to double check to make sure that the lower half of the fan shroud is attached to the radiator. Just give it a little wiggle, make sure that it's not falling off down along the bottom. After that, go ahead and squeeze in the top, start in both of your bolts, and then snug them up. Give that a nice wiggle, make sure it's secure. Just going to grab this wiring, slide it up along the top area here. We'll grab our overflow hose. Perfect. Let's connect in our upper radiator hose to the radiator. Make sure you slide it all the way up to this area here. Once it's up, go ahead and secure it. Tighten up the clamp here. Make sure that's nice and tight. Now it's going to be time to install our serpentine belt. Go ahead and follow the diagram provided. Now we're just going to go ahead and put pressure on this tensioner. That way there we can slide the belt over all the pulleys. Okay, so now that I have the belt over all my pulleys, I just want to double check to make sure it's sitting into the grooves. A lot of the pulleys are going to have grooves on them where the belt's supposed to sit. Other pulleys are going to be flat and smooth. That's where the back of the belt's going to be. Make sure it's sitting inside the grooves. Once you're sure it looks good, let's continue on. Back underneath the truck, let's go ahead and get our lower radiator hose back on there. Push it all the way down so it bottoms out with the radiator. And then we'll snug it up. Make sure the clamp is sitting flush. And then make sure it's nice and tight. Underneath the truck, make sure you double check. You want that petcock to be nice and tight. Okay, so now that we have the hose nice and tight, let's go ahead and put up our shields, assuming you have some. Let's get our engine cover back on there. You'll notice on the back side of it, you've got a couple little hooky-doos. Those need to place onto this area on the back side of the engine. Line them up, slide this down. It should fit onto the little pitons. Give it a couple loving bonks, and then make sure it's secured. Now it's going to be time to go ahead and fill up our cooling system. Typically when you do this, you're going to want to use something that looks like this, which is a funnel. The reason why I want to do that is because there's going to be a lot of air inside the cooling system, and we need to make sure we get it all out of there. So what I'm going to continue on by doing is filling up this funnel right here, so it's approximately 3/4 of the way, and we're going to let it burp its way down and continue filling along the way. Once it seems as though it's burped out all the air that seems like it's in the system, you're going to go ahead and start up the truck and run it for a little while with the heat on hot. That's going to help open up that thermostat and help the circulation flow. Once that happens, you're probably going to notice that there's a lot more air bubbles coming out of here, so just keep making sure that you top it off along the way. Now the coolant that I'm using inside this is universal coolant, so you might notice that it's a different color than what you might normally see. Okay, so I ran this, I got out all the air bubbles that I can. I'm just going to continue on by closing this off. We'll pull this up and out of here, and we're going to put the rest right into our overflow container. Let's fill up the overflow container so it looks like it's at the maximum line. Okay, let's get this cap on here, and of course our radiator cap on the radiator. All right, last couple things, just go ahead and start it up. You want to make sure that your temperature stays inside the normal range. Aside from that, go ahead and take it for a road test.